when I read the original Japanese for this line, I was shocked at what Ted did.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, wait.
It totally changes the feel of it.
You were under crunch. What?
Welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name is Kason.
This is episode 2 of our Final Fantasy VI analysis series. Thank you for joining us. Last time we detailed the development history of the game, so today we're going to jump right into the opening section. I think there's something that I kind of wanted to go over as sort of just like a general way that I approach looking at RPGs from the SNES versus the PlayStation 1 or beyond. It's not like this has been any kind of majority voice necessarily, but I've been seeing it a little more recently. And I think it's because we're getting older and these games we grew up with seem really, I mean, it used to be more, it was like the NES got this treatment, but now I'm starting to see SNES games be talked about this way.
Yes, of course.
And it's weird. It's a weird feeling because we played these games and they were like, the stories were so great and deep to us, right? Yeah. But I think in comparison to what, I mean, like Xenogears and games like that started doing on the next generation, some people might look back at a game like Final Fantasy VI and say, this story is super simple. There's nothing really heady or, deep about it. It's pretty basic. And I wanted to kind of respond to that in a couple of ways. I think this is something I'll address more and more throughout, because I think there is more to this than a statement like that can really, you can't really dismiss this game with a statement like that. But there's no doubt that games of this period certainly did not have the depth in terms of writing and characters and storytelling and philosophy that they did shortly after that on the PlayStation 1. And a big part of that was cartridge limitations, and we touched on that a bit last week with some quotes from Kitase and things like that. But I guess the one thing I would or maybe I'll just say the way that I look at it, right? Particularly with these JRPGs, which were full of abstractions. It's almost like in every level of it, it's an abstraction. You're not really meant to believe, and I've said this many, many times, that the characters grow up into giants as large as towns and walk around on the world map as giant people, right? That's not what's actually happening. It's just a way of getting across the idea. You traveled 20 miles from the mountain area of Narshe to the desert of Figaro, right? Now, in real time, that might have taken you 2 minutes, and you might have fought 2 or 3 battles on the way. But the idea is they actually walked really far, and you encountered enemies and gained experience as you traveled along the way. So it's a way of getting it across with the use of an abstraction.
Yeah. I love it when you enter battles, when you're in that overworld, then it does show you a more scenic view of the area as it may have actually looked as they were traversing it, right? And it does end up, those sceneries are always really, really cool, really good looking.
Yeah, it's great. Graphics are a similar thing with games back in this time. They used all kinds of different ways to get across an idea of what a character might be feeling or whatever, where you're not really meant to think of it in a literal sense. So I feel almost the same way about dialogue and storytelling in a lot of these Super Nintendo games, these Super Nintendo RPGs, where they're meant to give you the feeling of, the feeling of this in-depth drama with these characters with elaborate backstories, but where they couldn't really put those scenes, as many of those scenes, or nearly as much dialogue. And we talked about Ted Woolsey, the character meaning like letters, character limitation. On
very heavy.
He was twice over what he was allowed to put in there character-wise. And he had to rewrite it and then rewrite it again and just really, really just try to get the idea across in the text box.
Well, that's what Snipe LAN here on the Patreon Discord, he says the storyline is definitely compressed. I think the word compression, that's a really good word for it.
Yeah.
Right, because when you compress something, you're getting rid of everything except for the absolutely essential information.
Yes.
Right? You get rid of all the redundancy, and you bring it into something that's smaller. A 2-hour conversation ends up being 30 seconds.
Yes.
But it conveys the idea still.
Yes. I think that's exactly what the dialogue of these games was doing. And that was part of the constraint of not being able to write out, you know. And in a lot of ways, I appreciated how writers at that time went about being able to do that. Whereas when that became unlimited, you could write as much as you want. They started to go really overboard, and you would have, you know, a plot twist late in the game where the villain would go on for like almost a half an hour to an hour, just like monologuing and just explaining how elaborate it was and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, you know, like, that's the other side of the spectrum, I guess. That's too far that way. But I feel like these games did a really good job, and maybe that's why you know, we have talked a lot in the past about what if you were to you know, adapt like a Super Nintendo RPG game into like a TV series or something, and it would be really difficult because it left a lot up into the player's interpretation. But that was true of the graphics. That was true of music. That was true of all these different things.
In every way. And
so, like, you can interpret it in a lot of different ways. And I think that's why a lot of different people, you know, kind of have, like, and it's kind of, anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. But I challenge people to think about it a little bit more like that. And there's one example I'm going to bring up a little later of how just a small tweak to some of the dialogue can really change how something lands and how something feels. And we're going to take probably a lot of time in this episode talking about translation and localization in particular, because the difference between the Japanese script and Ted Woolsey's script is kind of immense. It's not
huge. It's a chasm.
He took a lot of liberties.
Yeah,
and then the retranslation for like the Game Boy Advance version, which was done by Tom Slattery, I think his name is Slattery, who also did an amazing Final Fantasy IV translation for the DS version, which is, I mean, it's not close. I don't care who you are. You can argue with me all day. It's so much better than any other version of that script. So I love his work, and I feel like his work on the Final Fantasy VI Game Boy Advance version was much better than Ted Woolsey's. So all that being said, I'm also a person who's not, I guess, I'm trying to figure out how to put this. Like, I don't love this sentiment that I get from some people who love JRPGs that the more complex a plot is, like, there's almost an inherent, it's almost better in an inherent way. Like, people would say the story of Xenogears it can never be topped. This level of complexity and this, you know, use of metaphor and an allusion to real world philosophy and science and religion and psychology and all this stuff. It's like, if it doesn't have that, nothing can, you know, approach being this good again. And I've just always been the proponent that, like, a simple plot can be just as good as a complex one, like, if it's executed the right way. And I think that's where Final Fantasy VI, games like Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, for example, really shine, is that they are a little more simple in that sense, but they're almost flawless in terms of how they execute on what they're trying to do.
See, and when you bring up execution, then that's where some of the other examples of complex stories kind of falter a little bit.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a lot harder to do that, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I just kind of wanted to throw that out there for those of you who are like, I'm not a big fan of this game. I didn't think it was that great. Maybe you went back and played Final Fantasy VI after having played something like a Xenogears or a Final Fantasy VII or something like that, and you're like, wait a minute, this is like really basic in comparison. I actually had a similar feeling the first time I went back and played the older ones, because 7 was my first. Right. But I hope that at this point we've earned your trust as far as, because if I had a nickel for every time we were going to start a new game and somebody came out and said, oh, that's been done to death, there's nothing left to say about that.
Yes. And then whoa, where did you find new things to say about that? Yes.
Yeah, I hope that you'll trust that we will be able to bring a unique perspective on this game to the table. So hopefully you'll stick around for that reason, even if you don't think there's that much to say about Final Fantasy VI, or if you don't think it's that deep of a game or a story. As far as that goes, anything else you want to add to that? Or
I'm ready to hop right into the game.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay. Well, should we talk about translation stuff first? Because you said you had a ton of notes on
I do, only
the Japanese version.
As they come up, I began... So as I played this game, I began taking notes of like, oh, this is a little different. I looked up the Japanese script, and I'm like kind of following along both sides, and there's actually quite a bit of hiragana, katakana in the Japanese script. There's not as much kanji as you'd expect. Therefore, it's something I can follow a lot better. I'm not so perfect with kanji, but I can keep up with this really well.
Well, that's probably because they were expecting younger kids to play the
I think
game,
that's
right?
exactly why.
Yeah, yes. You don't see as much kanji in Super Famicom games.
Some of the, games that we played later, that was a little more difficult. But... as I go through, I begin thinking like, oh, this is different. Oh, this is the word they use for this. Oh, like here's a good example, the word magitech. And I bring this up almost every time we play a Japanese game. The English words they come up with are way more creative than the Japanese word that was used.
Really?
The Japanese word is mado. Well, maho means magic. The kanji would be ma, meaning technically like an evil spirit. It references a demon of some sort. And then ho, which means like a law. So the demonic law. But then do is more like a way or a path, right? So it's the path of the evil demon. Either way, it means magic in a similar vein. It's not that different of a word. It's just magic. But then when they translate it to English, they never just use the plain word. They always go, oh, well, like a shade or magitech, right? And I love the word magitech. Yeah. I wish it was something similar in the Japanese, but it's not. And their use of the different words, like esper. Oh, we've got this word esper, really cool word. I'd have to look up the Japanese word real quick because it just means basically, genju. So genju means a mythical creature or a phantom beast. A genju, it's not like esper. Anyways. There's some really interesting stuff with the Japanese, but I guess the bottom line is that Ted Woolsey was very creative in the way he translated this Japanese. In some ways, really cool, to great effect. In other ways, kind of makes the story really hard to understand. Like, Kefka is so different in the Japanese versus the English. So different. And a lot of characters, like Locke. Locke is actually quite different as well. Anyways, point being, I kind of had to take a step back and stop analyzing every line of dialogue because it's just too different. The Japanese version of this game is almost a completely different game, and I will bring it up when I think it's a really big deal. Other than that, just know that nothing that is said in the English is all that close to what was said in the Japanese almost every single time. Yeah.
I just want to also reiterate this because we kind of touched on this last time. This is not meant to like knock Ted Woolsey per se.
No, he had a hard job, man.
Yeah. Like we said, his first translation of the game was probably something much closer to what the Japanese version was, but they're like, you have 2 times too much dialogue.
It couldn't fit on the cartridge.
It just couldn't fit. You have to cut it in half.
Right, not his fault.
So, what are you going to do? Like, you can't follow it. You have to just try to get at the essence of it. And he did the best he could in 30 days, by the way, 30 days, 1,300 pages in 30 days. So, this is by no means us saying he's a bad translator or anything like that. That's just the state that English localization was in at the time. We talk about Richard Honeywood, who came in and kind of like set a new standard for how Square would do localizations after Xenogears because of how horrible that experience was for him. So we weren't even up to that point yet where he was, working for the company. So, but it is to say that the English versions of these games, as far as dialogue and the words, the pen to the paper, process, it certainly doesn't. It leaves a little bit to be desired for the original Super NES versions. I know this was true for you too, but it was definitely true for me. The first time I played Final Fantasy IV, the Super Nintendo version, I was like...
That's the only one I've played. I have not played the DS version yet.
Yeah, I just didn't think it was that great.
Just kind of underwhelmed.
It was just like an underwhelming story. It didn't really seem to hit me with much impact. I play the same game again. It's a DS version, but that script is so much better at conveying the tone that game is going for, which you can hear and feel in the music and in sort of the content that it's tackling. But on top of that, it just sounds more appropriate for the setting. It reads much more beautifully. Like the words have way more impact to them. And that is also probably true of the Japanese version, I would assume, of Final Fantasy VI versus Ted Woolsey's Final Fantasy VI translation. Now, Tom Slatter, who did the translation of Final Fantasy IV I'm talking about for the DS version, also did the version of Final Fantasy VI for the Game Boy Advance, and that's the version I'm going to be referencing when we're taking quotes from the game and things like that. I think it's not only far more accurate, but just in terms of like what was said and being closer to or more faithful to the Japanese script, but it also much more accurately gets across the tone, and it takes out some of what are called Woolsey, what has become known as Woolseyisms, where he would do a lot of pop culture references.
Yeah, I've noticed a little bit of that,
Yeah, and like that fits when you're doing Super Mario RPG.
Oh, sure.
I'm not sure it fits so well in Final Fantasy VI, but in any case, I was kind of... You were looking at the Japanese, which I can't do, but I was looking at a lot of the differences between the Super Nintendo, the Game Boy Advance, and several fan translations as well.
Okay.
And it was it actually really surprised me, not just like because I didn't really know this beforehand, but I just had this feeling about Ted Woolsey where it's like he makes the game feel a little lighter, a little sillier,
yes,
a little less. I don't know, serious.
Yeah.
But like clearly from like the color palette, the music, this game's supposed to be a little darker than say Final Fantasy V was.
But was he clued into that? Could he hear the music?
I would assume so.
Did he
but
see the visuals?
I just don't know how seriously he took video games in general. I can't speak for him. I'm not saying he didn't. I just don't know. But like I have an article pulled up here, and there's a couple things I want to read from this. The guy who wrote this article, his name is Clyde Mendelin. He's also he works in localization, and so here's his kind of summary of his article. He says, "We've looked at 4 different translations of Final Fantasy VI in great detail, and compared each one with the original Japanese script. Each version has its own pros and cons in terms of gameplay, presentation, content differences, and so on. But in terms of translation only, I feel that the Game Boy Advance translation of Final Fantasy VI is unquestionably the best translation out of all of them by far. For all the full details behind this conclusion, check out another link he has here. So here's what he says about the Super NES. I'm just going to leave it at this. We're not going to do the whole article, but just what his feelings on the Super NES version. This was the first English translation of Final Fantasy VI. It was released in 1994, when serious game localization was still in its early stages. I loved the game as a youngster, and I'm sure its translation helped push me toward becoming a professional translator years later. So it's got an important place in my heart. Going into this project, I knew the Super NES translation had some flaws and mistranslations. I mean, on top of the obvious things, like the names of items and names of people which are wrong, like tonic instead of potion, or tincture instead of ether. And like, just, it's weird because it has different names for all these common items that the series has in all the other games in English. So it's unique in that way. But he goes on to say, I fully enjoyed it without issue at the time, had many good memories of it, so I always assumed these translation issues were minor in the grand scope of things. I was wrong. It turns out the Super NES translation has many deeper problems than I think most fans realize. It has major mistranslations and issues right from the start and doesn't let up until the game is over. Here are a few quick examples. So we'll probably have to put these on the screen for people. Example of I'll send this link so that you can have the photos and whatnot. So we have the scene here where Locke meets the older guy who helped Terra. Like she woke up in the bed and he had taken the crown off of her, right, and sent her on her way. So he says Imperial troops are pursuing her even as we speak. And what he notes underneath this is the Super NES translation makes major story mistakes right off the bat and keeps on going at that level. Here we have Kefka saying, "Fire, fire, heh, heh, heh." It's a very specific place where he puts that comma, the heh, heh. And it's from Beavis and Butthead. It's a direct quote from Beavis and Butthead. That's so Ted Woolsey has Kefka uttering a line as like a Beavis and Butthead, character would do that. So there's tons of pop culture references of from the Three Stooges, from Citizen Kane, The Price is Right, Beavis and Butthead, and more. It says entire story threads and character arcs are misinterpreted and mistranslated. Locke's motivation and his backstory, which I won't put on the screen yet, are a prime example, but there are many more too. So we'll probably have to bring that up later at that point. Here's one that we'll also have to bring up later about espers, though, like in terms of world building and the nature of espers and stuff like that. The world building is full of translation mistakes, including the nature of espers, what the esper world is, how Terra came about, and all that, which is a significant portion of the game's story. Then you have another one here, again, shocking moments. So let's say like a big twist later in the story, completely mishandled in terms of like what the Emperor is saying here. It's just like totally wrong. Now, I didn't realize a lot of this either, but going through it this week and watching the two different versions, it's like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can play the Super Nintendo version of this game
that's what I'm playing
anymore. Now, you can patch the Game Boy Advance translation into the Super Nintendo version. A lot of people do it that way because the one con of the Game Boy Advance version is that the music is like really compressed. It sounds pretty bad.
Oh, darn.
So if you want that Super Nintendo beautiful sound, but you want the script, there are ways to do that. So I'll let everybody else figure out how they go about making that happen. But I just wanted, I wanted to bring that up. I'm going to be using the text from the Game Boy Advance version to really analyze the game mostly. I'm not going to do too much of this, like jumping back and forth and comparing. I'll share a couple examples from the plot from the dialogue I took today for today's episode, but I'll just kind of leave it at that and say, like, trust me, I feel like the script of the Game Boy Advance is much stronger. Yeah, outside of that, I think that's about all I wanted to talk about in regards to that. But all of these things can really change how certain story beats, shocking moments that are meant to be dramatic but end up sounding silly, how they land. And depending on which version you played, like that may have affected like how you felt about the story overall, right? So those are all things to keep in mind for those of you who are doubtful that we can pull anything really interesting or philosophical or deep or, I don't know, meaningful to talk about here. But let's just say maybe that's the vocal minority I was hearing throughout this week and preparing to respond to. But I think the vast majority of people who played Final Fantasy VI think it's one of the greatest games of all time. So, okay. I'm going to let you take off here because
all right.
I know that you really enjoy intros and openings and breaking them down. And so I'm excited to hear what you have to say. But just one last thing. One of the very first things that Ted Woolsey got wrong was the name of a character here at the beginning. It's Biggs and Wedge. It's supposed to be a Star Wars reference, which I'm complaining about pop culture references, right? And that was a very purposeful Star Wars reference
from Japan
that Ted Woolsey somehow didn't seem to get.
Yes.
Even though that's like totally his thing. And he named the character Vix instead of Biggs. So anyways, his name's supposed to be Biggs.
All right. So the beginning of games is incredibly important. We've talked about this. It's the hook. It's the first sentence of the first paragraph of the first page of the first chapter of a good book, you know. It's extremely important. So I love picking this stuff apart. I love really diving into just exactly how the game chooses to present itself to us. In a way, the beginning of a game is the creation of the world of the game, right? And so as you read as you watch or play the very beginning of a game, this is what it's telling you what the game is. It's creating the world for you to kind of absorb into your mind that's going to inform the rest of your playthrough. So at the very beginning of this game, we have darkness. Some games dip to light, some games fade to black, right? So you hit start and everything goes black. Then we see a moonlit night, though we don't see the moon, only the hint of it through the way the clouds are lit. But we know it's a storm. There's lightning flashing from the clouds. As we descend below the horizon into the clouds, the screen grows even darker. The lightning illuminates the shape of the clouds, revealing what lies in the veiled darkness. Without the lightning, everything would be black. A solo organ begins to play. The music takes 6 steps up to the 7th measure, where the voices are introduced, kind of like a choir, right? But you get those 6 steps, and each step up on the scale, the previous note continues to be sustained. It's held throughout, right? Mm-hmm. So the music is very ominous. It's a pipe organ, but it reminds me a lot of the track, Thus Spoke Zarathustra from 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So we've got that sound. Of course, this is also the name of one of Nietzsche's famous books. There will be some exploration of Nietzsche's ideas later on in the game, so I don't think this was just coincidental, sure. Right? The music here is very dissonant, though, and lacks the hopeful feeling that 2001, A Space Odyssey, that track gives. It leaves one with a hopeless, dare I say, nihilistic feeling right out of the gate, especially when paired with the darkness of the storm that we find ourselves surrounded by visually. Everything is dark. It is all darkness, nothingness, and the only light that we see to latch onto as a beacon of hope is the occasional lightning bolt, which does little to assuage our discomfort. Mm. As the music hits its climax, the title, Final Fantasy III, appears on the screen, each letter filled with fire. The fiery letters appear foreboding against a backdrop of a dark and stormy night. The music then quickly changes to a harp or other similar-sounding stringed instrument, right? The camera continues to move further and further down. The descent is long and dark. It's kind of crazy how long the camera takes before it finally settles, right? But the music gives more of a feeling of wonder and mystery. Though, the music also seems somewhat frantic and distressed, as if it's in a hurry to get someplace. As the camera finally settles on the ground, the music begins to slow and settle as well. Then we see a canyon, at the bottom of which appears to be a series of isolated fires, like torchlight, signifying that there's a town there. Is it on fire? Hard to say. There is an hermetic principle, that probably the most famous one that most people are familiar with, which says, as above, so below, right? Yep, mm-hmm. So the raging storm above is telling us something about the village down below. A storm is coming, a massive, massive storm. And to the extent that that town is a peaceful one, it likely won't be for long. The image fades and a bell begins to ring, a large bell ringing slowly. So bells are a measure of time. Now, this is part of the song, right, that plays, and it's one of the famous songs of the game. But bells are a measure of time. Bells are almost universal in their meaning. They represent a beginning and an ending. They're used to signify time, such as the Joya no Kane in Japan, where a bell is rung 108 times on New Year's Eve. Mm-hmm. That's like a thing that they've been doing for a really long time. That number 108 happened in on Sunday, too. I asked a kid to guess the age of somebody who was next to me, and the kid said, 108. Seriously. And the girl made a joke, and she's like 20. She goes, I'm actually 109. But then I played this game. I'm like, 108, what are the freaking odds? Okay, great. Anyways, this just came up in my research. Bells also have an almost universal use in religious ceremonies all throughout the world. They can ward off evil spirits, invite good ones, and signify the coming of dawn or dusk. Mm. The use of bells in this song gives me the impression that we're seeing the end of something, right? That a bell is, ringing out
for whom
the setting sun. I'm going to get into that. I am going to get into that, because just like Thus Spake Zarathustra, I think this song might actually be referencing that exact idea. Mm. It's like the bell that rings at a funeral. The foreboding bells that the bells give here is that in many societies, from east to west, the ringing of a bell is a signifier to begin praying, right? This is Catholic churches, Muslim mosques, like this is what happens. The bell rings, and that is the expectation, right? So when we see a town that is about to be destroyed and a bell begins to ring, the only thought that I have for them is say your prayers because you're about to die, right? So this, of course, is strengthened in my mind by the fact that the bells ringing at this point sound just like the song I used to listen to in high school by Metallica called For Whom the Bell Tolls. It's a killer song, right? Yep. But get a load of this. I've looked into the background of that song now. So the bell sound is eerily reminiscent of that song. It's like the same tone, the same kind of pacing between bell rings. Like I feel like, and Nobuo Uematsu was a fan of rock and roll music,
for sure
right?
He was. Yeah. You know what's funny about this is I played this game around the time that we were all messing around in RPG Maker.
Oh yeah, right? That's right. Yeah.
And we would use
like
music MIDI processing thing. It was a software called Melody Assistant to write our own music that we could then put into the games. And I remember that it's both FF7 and FF6. And actually, even Seiken Densetsu 3 as well. They have that specific bell sort of chiming sound effect.
Like a preset,
Yeah, that they would use in music for ominous sort of like tones.
Yeah.
And I remember making For Whom the Bells Toll, trying to like mimic that, but like in Melody Assistant to use for a scene in a game that I was making in RPG Maker. So that tone,
that's funny.
I totally made the same connection even back then to Metallica. Was that specific like bell ringing tone. It sounded really similar.
It sounds just exactly the same. So that song, For Whom the Bell Tolls, is named after a book of the same name by Ernest Hemingway. The book, For Whom the Bell Tolls, is interestingly enough based on the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s. Isn't that great?
Wow.
So during which the movie Pan's Labyrinth is set, which is a film that we analyzed for Patreon.
We just did it.
just last month, right? So that's great. So Hemingway's book follows an insurgent who is fighting as a rebel against an authoritarian regime in Spain.
Wow.
There will be a parallel to this throughout Final Fantasy VI, I think. Yep. So in the book, Hemingway makes mention of a poem from the early 17th century, I think. It reads, "Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." That's a beautiful quote.
Yeah.
Of course, this is a reference to the funeral toll practice that is still in use today. It's the sound of a single tenor bell ringing slowly with a significant gap between strikes. It's used to mark the death of a person at a funeral or a burial service. In Final Fantasy VI, the bells are ringing and the toll is rising. So do you want to, I'm sure you wrote this down, but the prologue.
Yeah, so I took down the version from the advanced.
Yeah, please read that one. I'm curious to see how different it is.
The ancient war of the Magi, when its flames last receded, only the charred husk of a world remained. Even the power of magic was lost. In the 1,000 years that followed, iron, gunpowder, and steam engines took the place of magic, and life slowly returned to the barren land. Yet there now stands one who would reawaken the magic of ages past, and use its dread power as a means by which to conquer the world. Could anyone truly be foolish enough to repeat that mistake?
Now, I have questions here.
Okay.
And I wrote down here, let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Magic is bad. No magic, please. Just leave us to our machines and coal and gunpowder and technology. Magic only leads to death and destruction. Have I got this straight?
It seems that at least in the past, the ancients, they wielded it to such a degree. Well, let's just say there's probably degrees of power with magic, right? Yeah. That went up to a certain point of destruction that was atomic bomb level kind of thing, right?
So I mentioned earlier that the Japanese word for magic, it has somewhat of a demonic connotation, right?
Yeah,
it kind of applies a little bit towards, slants a little towards the evil side. And of course, you know, they can use it however they want to in a lot of their stuff. It doesn't always mean that. But that's kind of the context that most people who hear that word would kind of think of, at least in the Japanese.
That's an interesting point, because that's not true in English. Magic is kind of seen as this power that goes either way. It's sort of like there's a good side and there's a bad side to magic, almost in every case I can think of.
Exactly. And there is that in Japan, but not as much. In the West, there are some magic traditions that are all about calling upon angels to do good things.
Right.
But then there's also the ancient magic traditions that call upon the devils to do bad things, right? And so there's kind of like a split. There's like a both sides thing there. With Japan, you have more or less, I think you have a greater number of ambivalent spirits in Japan. That's like, could be good, could be bad. Don't know. But let's, team up and see what happens, right? Now, Christianity would say, well, that's a demon, right? But in Japan, it's like, no, it can be both, right? It doesn't have to be only good or only bad. So in Japan, there is a little bit of nuance there, but I think it's fascinating. I like the difference in translation from what you just read, because what it says in the Super NES is the force known as magic. It just says magic. But what this translation said, the ancient magic, it's referencing a specific kind of magic.
Right.
Whereas in FF6, it's just like magic in general. Magic bad, technology good, right? That's really good for me to hear. So I really like that. As we see the line about some people wish to enslave the world by reviving magic, it shows a palace that we see a little bit later on.
Yes.
See, it's Gestalt's kind of place, or wherever Kefka does his stuff, right? So we see that scene, but it's very industrial, and it's very smokestacks, and there's pollution, and the sunset looks weird, and it looks very industrial. So while they're saying magic isn't good because we have technology and it's very good, and peaceful, they're showing us just like a kind of a dystopian environment that just doesn't look very appealing. It's just like, ugh, what's that? Like, what's this industrial smokestack pollution machine in the background here? So I feel like there's a little bit of like dissonance there between what they're saying and what they're showing, where it's like, you know what, I'll bet you that there is a good side to this magic too. I don't know, but we'll see, exactly where that goes.
Yeah. I know that you're sort of, I don't know what the term is, not oversimplifying. That's not the word I'm looking for. I can't think of the word I'm looking for. With your
not
summary. Sure. But I guess I just want to point out, just in anticipation of maybe some comments, that I'm not sure it's trying to say the gunpowder and the steam engines and the iron are good necessarily, just that they replaced magic. So like, magic went away, and there was this period of kind of like darkness and maybe regression in human civilization. And then the iron and the gunpowder and the steam engines came around and sort of returned humanity to a similar maybe level of civilization as before. But but now Gestalt is trying to, reawaken that magic that had destroyed the world before. Anyway. Just wanted to make that note.
So we've got the Magitech armor people showing up now.
Yeah. So I didn't mention this yet, but there's actually two things. So have you seen the intro of the PlayStation 1 version of Final Fantasy VI?
I think I have a long time ago, but not recently.
So when they released Final Fantasy, I think it was Anthology. Anyways, after FF7 came out, they kind of went back and ported Final Fantasy 4, 5. I believe 4 and 5 were together, Anyway, Chrono Trigger was thrown into one. There was two different ones. There was two different ones. There was an anthology, and then there was a something else. Okay. And FF6, FF4, FF5, and Chrono Trigger were all kind of localized at that time. In any case, they have these. Oh no, it's Final Fantasy 1 and 2, and then something else. Anyways, I can't believe I am not thinking of like what they're titled right now or which ones came with what. I didn't play these games on the. I didn't play the PlayStation versions.
Yeah, me neither.
Anyways, they were trying to get out all of the Final Fantasy games into the West after the huge success of Final Fantasy VII. The only one that didn't really make it was 3. So, anyways, point is they created these little like CGI intros for these games. Okay. And so Final Fantasy VI is pretty interesting because it kind of like interprets Amano's art as literally as you can onto a 3D model. Oh, really? So like, you know, when Terra, like the way Terra looks, the way Celeste looks, the way the characters look are very Amano looking. When she gets into the Magitech armor, it's the Amano version of the Magitech armor, not the one that you see in the game. So it's pretty cool for that reason. In terms of like how I feel it works as like, I like it better that you just start the game and it's just these ominous clouds with that like organ music, and then it just pans down and it just like goes right into that. I prefer that. Yeah, well, it's not change it. It's still in the game. It's just that this little intro cinematic will play and you kind of see Terra and Biggs and Wedge getting into a Magitech armor. You see like Kefka's face and he's sort of like cackling and seeing them off. And it's like they're getting in and moving on their way to Marsh. And then it moves into the scene where it pulls down on the ledge and they walk up and they say, oh, there's the city in the distance kind of thing.
Okay.
I mean, it's cool. I think it's really cool to see. I wish in, let's say, a remake of Final Fantasy 1, not Strangers of Paradise, but like a one that was trying to be more true to like what the original game was, that they would try a 3D game in the modern era that like tried to more literally sort of interpret Amano's art. I think that could be really cool. And this is something that kind of had that look, but like, you know, primitive 1999 CG kind of a thing. Yeah. Right. But it's kind of cool. Definitely worth seeing. They kind of do like a montage of a few scenes from the game. So the opera scene and a couple of other things. And then they go into Terra with the slave crown and Biggs and Wedge, and they're walking and they get inside of the Magitech armor, and then they kind of walk out the door. And it kind of what you're talking about like the darkness of like the title reveal and then how it sort of pans down. You just have the lightning and stuff. Yeah. The end of that scene ends with like a door opening up and it's very blinding white light. And I don't know, I just don't think it cuts too well into kind of how the game starts out with the title screen before. So if I were doing a television series of Final Fantasy VI, I would not include that scene. I would just cut straight to where it starts off, just the dark clouds and the lightning, and just go from there. But it is still kind of cool to see if you haven't seen it. So
okay, well, I did not see that.
Yeah, and then the other thing I was going to say was that this was, at the time, the first time that the reoccurring gag characters Biggs and Wedge appeared in Final Fantasy. So they would kind of go on to be recurring characters, like they're part of the Avalanche team in Final Fantasy VII. They're the physical comedy soldiers that you battle early on in Final Fantasy VIII, and they kind of reoccurring. You fight them a couple different times. So they kind of had them as reoccurring characters after this. I think they retconned the characters that talk with Cecil in the very, very beginning of Final Fantasy IV. This is in the after years, so in a sequel that came many years later, they retconned those characters to be Biggs and Wedge. But originally, this was the first time that Star Wars pop culture reference appeared, and it would kind of become a thing for a little while after that. So, anyway, we see those two in their little Magitech suits looking down at Narshe in the distance.
Yeah. By the way, the Japanese is Narshe. Narshe. So, I don't know. You can call it Narshe if you want. I'm just pointing this out for everyone. Who cares? Narshe is how they would say it. So Narshe.
Yeah.
Narshe.
They're kind of looking over the edge. There's the town in the distance, right? I think what Final Fantasy VI does really well, and kind of the entire section we're going to be talking about today, it's a pretty short amount of time in gameplay terms. I think you can get to playing at pretty like a leisurely speed. You can get up to where we're going to end today in the Returners hideout in like less than an hour and a half.
Okay.
So it's like pretty quick, right? In gameplay terms. And they do such a good job of establishing so many like of the important things you need to understand the stakes, to understand who these characters are. So this first scene is really set out to show us there's this girl named Terra, one of our main characters, and she's really scary. She's really powerful and really scary. And one of them is expressing that like, is this like okay? Like, should we be worried? She I think the way they term it in the original translation, she fried 50 of our Magitech armors in 30 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So, she's very powerful. And he's like, nope, with that slave crown on her head, she'll follow orders. She'll do what we tell her to do.
So this is how they introduce the concept of the slave crown, just in general.
Yeah. So she doesn't have free will while she's wearing this slave crown. She's basically made to do what she's doing. So we have a girl who is a really powerful witch or sorceress. I think they use the term witch in the original. Like she's being controlled, and they're taking her here because she's going to do the damage that you were alluding to, that they're sort of
the ominous
setting up to here, right? Like for whom the bells toll, this girl is coming to reap the havoc on this town, right?
And that's what makes it kind of difficult. Well, I'm going to get into this soon. I want to talk a little bit first about it's a nice touch that just the wind is blowing. There's no music.
Yes, there's no music. Yeah.
So you're sitting there, the wind is blowing. That's all that we hear. And these people are plotting to attack the town, but we get no music, only the wind blowing. So this is actually a really important symbol in Japan, because Fujin and Raijin, now you'll know those names, but Fujin and Raijin in Japan represent the wind and thunder gods, the most respected deities in Japan. We got to experience the foreboding of Raijin in the intro sequence, and now we're hearing the howling winds of Fujin, symbolizing the brewing of a storm and prophesying the unleashing of the power of the gods upon the land. You may remember the names Fujin and Raijin from our Final Fantasy VIII podcast. Shinto mythology is where these names originate from.
Yeah.
But so Biggs and Wedge call Terra a sorceress? They call her a sorceress. In Japanese, this often references evil magic. It's the Mado. It's just the Mado word, like Mahotsukai or something like that. So it can mean both, but traditionally it's referencing evil magic. So the reference to the slave crown on Terra's head is very interesting to me, because so they say she has no conscious thought and thus no free will. We see a bit of a mixture here with the fact that this is a crown, right? Yeah. So in one aspect, she's royalty, being crowned and all. But on the other hand, she's a slave due to the nature of the crown.
Yeah.
The coolest thing, this has to do with what you were just talking about. We got the foreboding scene, right? And then we've got these characters, and then they're going to move towards it. And they're going to go destroy. Terra is going to go, like, cause death and destruction, right? Terra's theme is what's playing during this intro credit scene, right? It's a rather melancholic song with snare drums that sound a bit like marching off to war. You've got that snare, that like marching snare going on. So we as the player may not want to kill anyone in this town. We know what's happening, right? We know there's a storm brewing and we're going to go kill some people, and we're the ones that are going to do it, and we're just marching off. Like, I almost feel like this is part of why this scene is so iconic. Yeah. It's not just that, wow, this is sick, this looks cool, look at these guys marching. It's like, and it's a long scene. You get like 2 minutes at least of just like, boom, slowly, just as the camera was it took its time moving through that storm to show us Narshe. Now it's really taking its time to show these people visit destruction upon the city, right? Now, you would assume they're going to blow up the whole city. That's not exactly what happens, but, you know, close enough. They kill a lot of people, and some good dogs too, by the way. It's very, very sad. But as they're marching there, we can't stop it. this is once again, you've got the dichotomy of like, oh, Terra's just wearing a slave crown. She's going to do whatever we tell her to do. And then also the player who is like, I don't want to just go kill a whole bunch of people in a town, but here I am. And we're in Terra's shoes, right? So we're along for the ride. And as Terra is a slave to the crown, we are the ones who are actually we're controlling her. Yeah. And we're the ones who are actually going to do the act of killing these people in this town.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's at least in part why this scene is so iconic, right? Yeah. It's not just that it looks cool. There's a whole lot more kind of leading into it. And once again, this is an attack and we're not the good guys.
Yeah. And and we have talked a lot about, what makes a great hook, what makes a good intro.
Yeah.
But in terms of intros or like when you use an opening credits sequence as like sort of like the beginning of your game, there's two that really stick out to me. This is one, and then of course Vagrant Story, the way it uses the slams to black with like the credits as it's going through its intro. It's just really creative, kind of the way that they did this. Because they're setting a tone. It's kind of it's all here to set a tone. It's like giving you that ominous feeling, and like you said, they linger on it for a long time. It takes a
long time, yeah.
Right, and it's like the perfect way to do a title, for the beginning of the story.
Opening credits, yeah.
Opening credits kind of thing. But you're kind of engaged the whole time, even though they're just walking straight, and it's just sort of slowly revealing like the mode 7, like over the hill kind of thing, as it's sort of slowly they're making their way towards the town. But I don't know, like there's not a single time I've played the game where I've wanted to skip that section. The use of the music, the animation on the Magitech armor, the snow, like just the composition of that shot, the way it looks, when it all comes together, it's like nothing's really happening other than you're seeing the names of the people who made the game.
Yes, yeah.
But it feels really like you're being drawn in even still.
Yes.
And it's pretty amazing that it pulls that off. Just with the use of the art and the music. And of course, kind of just like the dark tone of it all, which was so different from FF5. Like the way FF5 feels. FF5 is very light. The music's very light. It's very like
we're going to go on an adventure.
Like a feel-good adventure feel to it. Yeah. And this is so different from that. This is very, like you say, melancholic, dramatic, serious, dark.
The colors, too. The colors. Everything just seems... the colors are muted, right? Everything's a little desaturated. Yeah. It's not as bright and cheerful.
Yeah. It's really, really, really well done. Really well executed, even though, like... on paper, I guess, or if you're thinking about it in a general sense, not much happens in this intro. Yet it's considered to be one of the better intros in the series, or maybe even one of the better intros in gaming.
Yeah.
And you're really just kind of watching some text on the screen as some people are walking through the snow. But it's just, I don't know. It's, again, this is like really a point about execution, right? And how this game executes so masterfully. And it brings like all of its parts together into a whole that just like creates a feeling in you where it's just like you're drawn into that like almost immediately. So I can't give them enough praise for how they handled this scene. It's great.
Oh, me neither.
Okay.
I have a quick question here because my next note, I want to make sure that this is right first. Ah, dang it. They missed something. Okay. I have this note here, right? So Biggs and Wedge, they're just like, their first like words that they say once we get to Narshe is, let's put her on point. No sense in taking any risks. Right.
Oh, right.
So they're like going to use the slave girl as a human shield, which once again just reinforces that, these aren't the good guys who we're controlling. But it would have been, I don't know why in battle schema they couldn't have had Terra be moved forward. And the others
like
move
in
backward.
The front row and they're in the back row. Yeah.
That would have been a really good way to merge the plot, the storytelling, just the dialogue with the actual gameplay. Right.
Yeah, that would have been smart.
But instead, you see Terra is not taking point in the battles, and because if you're further up, I think you'll take more damage, you'll deal more damage.
Yes.
But and that would have really, anyways, I
agree. Missed opportunity. That would have been smart, a way to work in, like some of how the gameplay works with the story.
Yeah, missed opportunity.
Yeah.
But still. So yeah, I just wrote here, like, nice guys, real brave, use the slave girl as a shield. But we're only forced, we're forced to go along with it for now.
Yeah, so basically a bunch of the warriors, guards, whatever you want to call it, from Narshe come out to try to defend the town as you're marching through. You're heading into the mines, and you're just kind of like slaying these guys. The Magitech are really powerful. Like, it's basically one-hit kill on anything they hit, right? But, and I don't know if people would have picked up on this right away. They point this out more explicitly a little bit later. But Terra is the only one who has the ability, like in your little menu pull down where you have attack and items. She's the only one that has the magic ability. So the other guys can't use magic. She's the only one who can. So she has, right now, I think Fire and Cure are the two spells she's got. But she is the only one able to use magic. Now, they use Magitech armor, which seems to, like, the machines seem to be infused with some magical abilities, but the dudes themselves are not using magic. They're just pushing buttons in their little machine, and then it does it.
Yeah.
So something interesting to point out. She's the only one who can use magic herself.
And once again, in the town, all we can hear is the fierce wind blowing. And you also see it, too. As the smoke rises out of the chimneys, it goes immediately sideways, right? It's just...
Yeah.
So in the visual and audio,
wind.
It just feels very, very windy, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of attention to detail in this game's sprite art, which is
so
big,
good.
huge.
Absolutely.
Part of the reason why it's considered one of the best games of all time in terms of sprite art, pixel sprite art. But yeah, there's so much detail in everything. It's incredible. So they fight their way up into the mines. They're attacked there, and then one of the guards sends out a monster to fight us.
Was this that snail thing?
It was called Welk in the original Woolsey translation. It was renamed Ymir in later translations.
Oh, Ymir is Norse mythology.
Yeah.
The giant. It doesn't. This is
okay. So this is common of Final Fantasy games, but they
use the name, but then
they use like a lot of Greek and Norse names.
Yeah,
that the designs look nothing like what they were based on at all.
No, Ymir was the giant that the Earth is made out of. Basically, the Earth is made out of the giant Ymir. But like, this is a big snail.
Yeah, I remember. I can't remember which design it was that Amano did for a monster. I don't remember if it was Bahamut or if it was a behemoth, but he was like, he did his design, whether it was the dragon or the beast or whatever, and then, he looks up, there's actually a quote, this is going to go into the Final Fantasy retrospective at some point, but there was a quote, or he finally looked up what the original design is supposed to look like. He's like, yeah, I think mine's kind of cooler, so I'm just going to stick with mine. So they didn't base it on what they're named after at all.
So they just used the name and then did whatever they wanted.
It's a cool sounding name, so that's the only important thing.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the points that I'm going to bring up a little bit later. They seemed to do that quite a bit.
Yeah. So this also was kind of a first. No, actually, no, it wasn't. Final Fantasy IV was the first, but this was continuing a tradition that was just getting started kind of in Final Fantasy, which was that the first boss you fight ended up serving as a tutorial for a mechanic they don't really use again in the games later. So it's usually attack the monster when it's in this state,
and not the shell. Yeah, that's right.
Not when it's in this state. Yes. So in FF4, it was the mist dragon. You attack it but when it goes into the mist, and then if you attack it, it'll do a counter attack that's really powerful. In Final Fantasy VII, it's the guard scorpion, where when the tail is up, like, don't attack.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So they kind of started that tradition, and so anyway, they were doing that for a while. And so it's the only boss in the game that acts like this. But if the snail retreats into the shell, don't attack, and then wait for it to come back out and then attack it. Anyway,
Interesting.
I don't know why I think maybe the point was just to show people who had never played an RPG before, like me, when I played 7 for the first time. There's elements of strategy to these fights.
Yeah,
you don't just hit attack all the time. You have to consider the enemy's weaknesses. You have to consider what the enemy's doing. You have to like watch what they do and learn more about them, and then attack accordingly.
Yeah, it's more for people who are new to the genre just in general, because if something is never really used again for the rest of the game, why would it be part of your intro? Unless to show that, like, hey, there's strategy here. There's a lot you can do with the RPG. It's not just boring chess, one player goes, and like there's more going on here. I'm thinking Mario RPG as well. I think right at the very beginning, either the first or one of the first battles you fight is against Bowser, and you're supposed to attack the chandelier. You're not supposed to attack Bowser directly. You attack the chandelier, and then it drops Bowser, and made by the same company, by the way. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what the purpose of these boss fights was there for.
Okay.
So Biggs and Wedge go back and forth, basically tutorializing that, like, hey, don't attack it. Woolsey seemed to be able to get it right, whereas the FF7 translators did not. Where attack while his tail's up, okay, and then it kills you. And they got it wrong. Anyway, so you kill this snail monster, the Emir, and you come upon a frozen Esper. That's just what they're after. So Big says, so this is the frozen Esper. And then there's kind of a scripted battle here. You don't actually like take any actions. Wedge starts to get creeped out by it, nervous. Something doesn't seem right to him. Terra is not saying anything at all through this whole section. She says nothing. And then it begins to sort of emit this light. And Biggs and Wedge are like, ah, and they are obviously killed by the thing. And then she sort of seems to like emanate light herself. There's like lightning and
there's
energy.
An electrical connection.
Connecting between them, and then we kind of cut away from that, and then she's just waking up in a bed in a nearby house.
Now I have a little bit to say about this particular part. So first of all, as Terra and the Esper connect, right? So the whole reason they were here was to find this Esper.
Yes.
And this is funny because it's like archaeologists unearthed a demonic spirit that's going to curse the world, and it's like this is kind of playing on that kind of idea a little bit.
That's true.
But she shows up. The Esper and her have some kind of a connection. She has like mostly fire magic, right?
Yes.
She begins to emanate fire. I didn't take that to be an explosion from the attack. I took that to be her fire ignition or whatever. She was protected, obviously. So, but then the lightning connection was interesting because once again, as above, so below. What I wrote here in my notes is the storm that was brewing is now being unleashed.
Yeah.
But also, I had read this somewhere. Are there characters named Biggs and Wedge in Chrono Trigger?
I don't think so. Not in Chrono Trigger.
I had read somewhere that might be wrong that these characters were disappeared. And were placed into another game where it was like they went to an alternate reality.
Fan theory-esque to me.
Okay. Take that one with a grain of salt then, people.
I don't know. I haven't heard that. Maybe there's more evidence for that, but that's not something I've really ever investigated, so I can't say.
Next episode. We'll talk about it next time.
Okay. So the girl wakes up.
Yeah.
She speaks for the first time here in the game. Where am I? And the old man comes in, and he seems surprised that she's capable of speaking already.
Yeah.
My, and I just removed the crown, and you're already able to speak. You're already awake. That surprises him.
Meaning he's dealt with these crowns before, and he kind of knows what he's doing.
Yes, I thought about that. I thought about that. Like, he's obviously allied with the Returners now, but it gives me some... I mean, I don't think it's ever explained. I don't think we ever see this character again. Yeah. But... what his role might have been, say, in the Empire. Is he a defector? Is he just someone who's knowledgeable about these things?
That's a good point. Well, who knows? Maybe he's the one that made them.
Who knows? Like, there's like a whole thing about him that's kind of mysterious here, where he knows so much about slave crowns and how they should operate.
And how to take them off.
Yeah, right. Like I'm sure the developers didn't think that much about it, but it's still kind of interesting. He seems to know what he's doing here. So, my head hurts. He says, easy there. This is a slave crown. The others were using it to control you. It was robbing you of your thoughts, making it so you do whatever you were told. She says, I can't remember a thing. He says, don't worry, it'll all come back to you in time, that is. So RPGs nowadays, JRPGs, it's almost so common that your main characters have amnesia that it's
just expected.
It's just like an element. Almost like, when you talk about like the elements of the hero's journey, like the belly or the whale or whatever, it's just like it's part of the structure of the thing.
The amnesia hero. Yeah.
The amnesia hero is just like part of it, almost. Almost. It's like almost to that level.
Yeah, the trope becomes an archetype.
But, these games were sort of establishing that trope. But like, let's see, we have in Final Fantasy V, Galuf has amnesia. In this game, Terra has amnesia. In Final Fantasy VII, it's not really amnesia per se, but it's playing on the same trope.
Like that, yeah.
Final Fantasy IX, Zidane doesn't know where he comes from.
Yeah.
So the reason why they use this so often is because it allows you to put the player or the viewer into the point of view character who also doesn't know what's going on.
Who discovers his own past along with the player. Right. Instead of just already knowing it and then having to exposit it to the player somehow, even though he should already know.
Yeah. So this is used as a plot device, this slave crown, to have sort of like whatever it did, it affected her mind. And it's slowly going to come back to her. It's not a permanent thing. She's going to remember, but it's just going to take a while. So... she's kind of stuck right now, not knowing at all who she is or where she comes from or anything like that.
But then we see her like character intro. I like how they do these intros.
Yes, yes. So this game has a very famous opera scene in it, and and the way that they structure a lot of these things, it's kind of like the game is supposed to feel like a play. So like they'll have these pauses where like the lights go down and there's just a spotlight on the character.
That's cool.
And you have like an omniscient sort of voice who sort of narrates and tells you more information. Yeah. It feels very much like theater.
Sure.
It's almost like they tried to structure the game as if you were an audience member in a theater watching this, not like a movie necessarily.
Well, that actually helps a ton. You know what? That helps me to understand a lot of what happens a little bit later on. Every now and then a character will turn and face towards the camera and step forward and then laugh.
Yes.
Or do like a little gesture of sorts.
Yes.
And that's like, no, that was being done towards the audience.
Yes.
Why wasn't it done towards the character?
Yes.
You bringing that up helps me a ton. That's really good, actually. I love that.
Yeah, and it's...
You know what? Everyone should understand this when playing this game. Think of it as an opera or a play that is being directed towards you, the player, and not necessarily as a movie or whatever other medium you would naturally just try to project onto the events that are happening.
Yeah.
Thinking of it as a play, that helps a lot of it to feel less awkward, I think.
I agree. And it's very intentional, I think. And this kind of goes back to...
I think it's canon.
Some things that I've talked about in maybe other podcasts. So if people haven't seen the other ones, I'll kind of just briefly reiterate this. But from the very beginning of the Final Fantasy series, the intention was to make this feel like a diorama, like a little tiny set that they built with little tiny characters moving around inside of them. And you're like this giant who's like looking down on this little world and watching the events play out. This is something Koichi Ishii, who was the development planner on FF1, said was one of his ideas.
Oh, really? Did you talk to Sakaguchi about this when you met him personally?
I didn't, because I hadn't read that specific interview just yet.
Okay.
But we did talk about dioramas because
Fantasian, right?
The interview was for the purpose of promoting Fantasian. And for those of you who don't know Fantasian, that's Hironobu Sakaguchi's latest game, the creator of Final Fantasy, where essentially they built all of the sets that appear in the game, they built physical versions of them. They took high resolution photographs of those images, and then they projected them onto 3D models.
Yeah, that were scanned in.
That were scanned in. So, anyways, so they built the model, they scanned it into a 3D model, so in the computer, and then they took the photographs that they took of the physical set,
to texture,
and they did a projection map.
That's right. Yeah.
Onto the 3D model, right?
Yeah.
So the idea was that it would look like little characters are running around in this little world built by hand. And that's kind of what the Final Fantasy games aesthetic was supposed to look like.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that was kind of the idea behind it. So it's actually very fitting to present the game like a theater, because that's kind of what it is. A theater almost looks like that. You're way up in the seats, way up here, and you're looking down at this tiny world down here. And you know, when you're building sets and costumes and things for theater, right? Like, they have to get very creative in the way that they go about, particularly if you think of like amateur or like, say, high school theater or whatever. How are they going to make something that looks like a tree? You know, they'll build it out of like paper or something like that, right?
Exactly. And
so there's a lot of abstraction in the storytelling process of theater. Like, you're not meant to look at it all literally.
Yes.
And that's exactly what JRPGs were structured like.
Yeah.
They were full of abstraction in that way. And so it's a very fitting, I think, medium to do kind of an adaptation into. I think it would make way more sense to adapt Final Fantasy VI into a stage play than into like a film or a television series or something like that.
Yeah.
I just think that there's a lot of commonalities between the abstract way of telling stories in an opera or in theater and the way that they were at the time going about it in these JRPGs back then.
Right.
It wasn't really trying for realism necessarily or cinematic flair until it moved into more the PlayStation era.
7, yeah.
Right. So there was kind of a transition along the way where it became more cinematic, and now it's basically entirely cinematic. And there's a piece of that I miss a little bit about the old school Final Fantasy.
Oh, me too.
But this was definitely done for that reason. It was meant to feel like theater.
That's so cool, because you have the melodrama, right?
Yeah.
Which now this actually helps me to see Final Fantasy VIII in a little bit of a different light as well, right? Yeah. But either way, you have the melodrama and you have the characters that are overreacting. Everything they do is a massive overreaction, but it's meant, looking at it as a play, just that goes very far with me. I love that.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the reason why they do that, where they'll take all the lights down. It's totally black except for a spotlight on a character.
On a single character.
And they kind of just do a brief little, let me tell you a little bit more about this character real quick, and they fill you in with some details.
I love it.
Meant to feel that way. So it's kind of cool the way that they went about presenting it.
That's awesome. And it says, a mysterious young woman controlled by the Empire and born with the gift of magic. Now, what does it say in the advanced version?
Let's see. So what it says is, a mysterious young woman born with the gift of magic and enslaved by the Gestalian Empire.
Close enough.
Pretty similar.
Yeah. And you get to choose her name, right? Now, this is a decent time to bring up Terra. Terra means earth in Latin, and she has green hair, which goes very well with her name. However, the symbolism of her character is very suspect because, unfortunately, the character designer only gave her green hair because everyone else was blonde. And her name in Japanese isn't Terra or anything to do with the earth at all. It's just Tina.
Tina. Yep.
And Tina doesn't really mean anything. Tina, come eat your ham. It's like, okay, Tina's a llama from Napoleon Dynamite. That's what, okay. So, anyways, we'll see if there's a possibility for something later. But I went back, so I took this note. I went back and read a thing about specifically the character designer, the pixel art designer. It seems to me like she designed all of the characters to have a certain look, and then Yoshitaka Amano is the one who changed her green hair to blonde. He drew the art after she designed the pixel character.
Yeah, so from what I read, it seems like they would kind of be doing their designs at the same time. But Sakaguchi did say specifically that her designs almost always came first, probably because it takes a lot less time to make a pixel character than to draw a painting of a character.
Exactly.
But that Shibuya's character designs usually came first before Amano's did.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that from yesterday.
It's also interesting that this character's name is Terra in the Earth connection, but then one of the main protagonists, heroines from the next game from Final Fantasy VII is Aerith. And for the longest time, I had no idea why that name was because I thought it was Eris, because that's mistranslated. But it's because it's meant to sound like Earth.
Yeah, well, and she's part of
connection to
the Cetra.
The Cetra, her connection to the Earth is all kind of part of the story. So,
that's cool.
Anyways, we'll see where this goes with Terra. But
I love this because I'm seeing a lot of ideas here that I then can see how these ideas were carried into other games, such as 7, 8, 9, and Xenogears, and even other games beyond that.
Yeah.
It's really cool. I love if one of the coolest things about playing these old games is discovering where the new games got their ideas from, And so to the people who maybe don't hold this one as very valuable, for other than the fact that you're just wrong, there is still value to be had in the sense that you can see where a lot of these future games got some of their really cool, unique ideas. And they're all over this game. I'm seeing them everywhere.
Final Fantasy VII was the first one I played. Yeah, and it had such a lasting, powerful impression on me that I was compelled to go back and play all the other Final Fantasies.
Yeah,
but what's interesting,
like where it all, the roots, right? The roots.
Yes. So like maybe I didn't love any of those games as much as I loved Final Fantasy VII when it came down to it, or maybe I've come to appreciate them more later, or whatever the case might be. But there was something about wanting to see the history and the evolution of that series through time. And like really understanding like the development process that led to this thing, which was more or less just me trying to get more appreciation out of the thing that I had already played 1 billion times. And
so you could either play it again or you could do one of the earlier ones.
How can I understand this even better?
Yeah,
I don't think you even consciously think that.
Yeah.
But it is really interesting to see how the ideas like evolved, and I mean stuff like Magicite, right? Like Magicite sort of evolved into materia.
Right.
There were all kinds of ideas that kind of started here and kind of got carried over to later, and that was true of the game before and the game before this. It's cool to see the evolution, so that's kind of really the point I was going to make there. Okay, so she remembers her name, right? That's kind of the point, is you enter what her name is, whether you change it or leave it the same. And the old man is super impressed that she's able to remember her name already, that she's recovering that fast.
Which once again points to, hey everyone, this girl is special.
Yes, right.
This is a special person. We're
powerful, really powerful. Most people would not be able to recover at the speed that she is.
Yeah.
So these are context clues, and they're doing a really good job of this. I feel like in this intro, like not a lot of words have been said necessarily, but like they're able to like do a lot of the storytelling just in what they're suggesting. And that's the kind of storytelling I like. Yeah. They don't have to come out and like, well, I guess he is kind of coming out and saying like, it's wow, like people don't usually recover this fast. But what you're drawing from that is Terra is like a super, super powerful sorceress.
Yes.
And you kind of draw those hints like from the dialogue rather than them having to be like super on the nose about it.
Yeah.
Some might argue that this is on the nose, but I wouldn't classify it.
I wouldn't put this on the nose either. But we will pretty soon, we're going to get just more and more hints that she's not normal. Not that you need a ton of hints that she's unusual, but like, for instance, this happens later on, but when Edgar is like hitting on her and she's like, for most girls that probably would have done something, but for her, she just kind of ... She's like, but I'm not normal, right?
Yeah.
So we're really just like hammering down the fact that she's very unique, but we don't know why, and that's why it's such an intriguing mystery.
Yeah.
We don't know why she's different.
Yeah. So then the soldiers from Narshe come after her. He sends her out the back door, says, go through the mines.
Go to the mines.
Escape.
Into the mines.
So into the mines. She runs away because they're saying stuff about like she's a agent of the Empire and all this stuff. And he's like, well, Empire? Like, what do you mean? Like, I don't even know what that is all about. So he's like, they're not going to listen. These people they just don't understand. Like, you have to run away or else they're going to try to, capture or kill you.
In some way, he's even talking about his own townspeople, right? Like, they don't get it they don't get that you were being mind controlled.
Yeah. Okay, so as she runs away, they kind of pursue her into the caves. She falls through like a weak part of the floor and kind of like passes out.
And she gets a little flashback.
Yes, this flashback is really interesting. This is our first introduction to Kefka, who is a court mage of Emperor Gestal. So he's just from, I guess, that title, court mage. I think Edgar even calls him that a little bit later. He would be able to use magic too, which also creates kind of this other mystery where it's like the way that Edgar and Locke react to seeing Terra use magic in the battle when they just freak out.
They completely lose it.
It's like, dude, magic shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Yet this guy, Kefka, is called a court mage, right? So what's up with that?
Yeah.
And maybe even the little PS1 intro has, and this scene here, sort of like hint at like the fact that there's sort of a special bond of sorts between Kefka and Terra. And that's all going to be revealed much later. But so
very interesting.
He says here, my sweet little magic user, with this slave crown, you'll be all mine. So she's kind of remembering when they put it on. Yeah. Good. Burn them all to a crisp. So that I think this is the scene that that Biggs and Wedge were referring to earlier, where she fried all the Magitech armors. Yep. He had used her to do that in some sort of demonstration of her power. And so then, after that point, we have Emperor Gestal, who's standing in front of
and he says, a new power is rising.
Yes. One of those sort of, evil villain tyrant speeches, right? Soldiers of the Empire, we stand at the dawn of a new age. The lost power of magic has returned to us. So he has reawakened the magic.
Yeah.
We are the chosen ones. The time has come for us to claim our rightful dominion over the world. Nothing shall stand in our way. And they're all like, hurrah, long live the empire, all that kind of stuff. So she then passes out. Then we have another main character introduction here, Locke. He comes running into that old man's house. And the first thing he says is
great.
I love this. This
it was fun.
Okay, so one of the things that we talk about abstractions and like the way in which they got across like emotions of characters and things like that in these games back then, there was a very charming use of emotes that they did. And I think this really kind of started in FF5, but here as well. And in Chrono Trigger, they did this a lot. The big bug eyes, right? Like surprise emotes, where so it's like you're saying, it's so over the top.
It's as if it's a play, and they're overdoing it so people in the back can see.
Exactly right. You have to enunciate way more and project your voice way more and be way bigger in your expressions as a theater stage actor, because if you're too subtle, the people on the front row might have seen that, but the people up there won't get it. They won't understand what's going on. Yeah. So on the stage, you have to have the villain cackle and just like maniacally laugh to get across the point that he is, plotting something horrible.
Right.
Whereas on film, you can come in this close to the character's face and just see the twinkle in his eye.
A little,
and you can get the same point across.
Right.
So that's why they have to do that to really like get the point across here. It's just funny that what the old man says to him is, it took you long enough, busy with all the robbing and plundering, I presume. So he's accusing him of being a thief. And Locke's expression, that's really funny and charming.
It's really
as
funny.
An overreaction to that statement, right? But it really works because you're looking at a character that big.
Exactly.
It wouldn't be the same if you were to do a remake of Final Fantasy VI where Locke did a reaction to that, and you're like cinematic.
Yes.
So that's why when the medium changes per se, even though it's not really changing the medium, but like the style of presentation from cinematic or from theatrical to cinematic, there's a lot of things you kind of have to rework, or else it doesn't really like make sense for them to be acting this big, right?
Right, exactly.
Which I'm sure was a lot of discussion that went on with the Final Fantasy VII remake, and how big do we make Barrett's reactions to everything? Because in the game, he's just constantly stamping and like, and they're you see Cloud and people when they get excited, they just like jump like across the freaking room, and Like that won't really work if you're going to try to. You just got to try to translate the emotion without the actual literal like animation or movement, right? So, anyways, I really liked that about these games, that they were theatrical in this sense.
Me too. I loved it.
So it's great. And then so the screen goes black and you have the little spotlight on Locke, and they tell you a little bit about him. Yeah, a treasure hunter, a trail-worn traveler searching the world over for relics of the past. And he goes, I prefer the term treasure hunting. So he doesn't like being called a thief or a plunderer or a robber or a rogue. No, I'm an adventurer. I'm a noble treasure hunting type, right? And the old man's like, oh, that's semantic nonsense.
Yeah,
He's
whatever
like, no,
there's
a huge difference, man.
There's a huge difference.
So this is kind of his gag, his comedic relief. You'll see several times people calling him a thief, and he's like, no, I'm not a thief. So, let's see. So here's one pretty big difference that I took note of for the translations that kind of make a big difference to me. It's just a small thing, but it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So in the original SNES translation.
Oh, I took notes on this too.
Yeah. So the old man says something like, indeed, I met this girl, right?
Yes.
Like I've met the girl. And in the original version, Locke says like it's ... with like a huge exclamation mark and question mark. Like, what? Like he's surprised. This better not have anything to do with that Magitech writing Imperial Witch.
See, and this is where, okay, so we've been very, what is it? Almost not deferential, but we've been very kind to Ted Woolsey.
Sure.
Given, you didn't have much time and all of that stuff. When I read the original Japanese for this line, I was shocked at what Ted did.
Yeah.
Like,
it totally changes the feel of it.
You were under crunch. Why did you feel that you could change the entire tone of not just like the scene, but the character and their relationship? And like, why are you making it seem like Locke is really upset at her and doesn't like her, when the truth is, in the Japanese, he says something more like, oh, are you that girl from before? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, right.
In this one, it's like, you better not be talking about that witch. And it's like, whoa, buddy.
It's
like
totally different.
It changes his character. It changes the scene. It changes a lot. And like I said about, the intro of the game, I spent so much time just trying to analyze the intro of the game, because that's going to tell us like so much about the future, so much about how the game's going to go. It puts you in the right state. It builds the world for you so that your imagination can grab it, And that's true of character introductions too, right? This is the building of a character, and we're seeing, this the first time we meet Locke. And what my impression is, oh, he's kind of a jerk dude. He doesn't really care about her. He's prejudgmental, right? He thinks that because she does magic that he's scared of her, and like that was my initial thinking. And I was I don't know another word, but shocked. I was shocked to read the Japanese and be like, I don't think I've ever seen it this bad. Like it's not enough to just say, oh, Ted, you didn't have enough time. It's like, this was, there needs to be some punishment. I'm joking, of course, but like, this isn't okay.
This is way too
I don't
far.
think this is okay. I can't make an excuse for him here.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense for Locke to feel this way about her.
Yeah.
Locke is he's a go-between, but he's allied with the Returners. The Returners, he was sent here, I think, specifically to try to find her.
Right.
In fact, I may be wrong about that. Maybe he just kind of stumbled upon it and he was in the area or whatever. But he heard about her.
He was aware of her, yeah.
And the Returners would like to recruit her to their side.
They want to get her on their team, yes.
So it doesn't make sense for him to be like, oh, no, that horrible thing, like horrible person, what are you talking about? So in the advanced translation, again, you have the exclamation mark with the question mark, the surprise.
Yeah, that is still there.
And then he just says, you don't mean, and that's it. You mean you really did? You really found her? That's a totally different connotation. Yeah. You better not be talking about this person versus, did you really find her?
Right.
Totally different meanings. So, like, that's the kind of thing that Ted Woolsey got wrong quite frequently, actually.
Yes. Now, Mix, jumping to Ted Woolsey's defense as hard as he can on our Patreon Discord chat here, said that Tara could have had a really bad reputation because she had killed 50 soldiers and that Locke would have reason to be weary. I don't think that makes sense for him being upset, but it would make a little more sense if he was like, weary.
I think you could be nervous and a little bit cautious while still not like pissed. Like
you better not. Yeah,
that scum of the earth witch. Don't you dare tell me that that's who you're talking about.
Because that's not his character, and that's not the way his character.
Yeah, and it's not his character either. Yeah. That's the important part.
One other thing that was brought up here in the chat. Mm-hmm. You brought up that Aerith sounds like Earth, and it's supposed to mean something like Earth. Well, Cloud.
Yep.
Is kind of like sky or
as
celeste
above, so below, or whatever.
Yeah. Once again, you got the sky Earth dichotomy. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's keep going back to Final Fantasy VI.
Okay. So, old man. Okay. He says the city guard is pursuing her as we speak. This city has the strength to stand up to the or doesn't have the strength to stand up to the Empire. Oh no, he says they do have the strength to stand up to the Empire, but they won't use it. So they refuse to fight the Empire.
Right, they're trying to stay neutral or something. Yeah.
These people are just too stubbornly independent to join an underground resistance group like the Returners. I tried to explain that the Empire was controlling the girl, but they wouldn't even listen. So maybe that's why he's in the town. So if he's allied with the Returners, he's one of the Returners. Maybe he came there trying to persuade Narshe to join them and fight against the Empire. Yeah. But he's become fed up with them at this point because they won't do it. They're too stubborn, right?
Right.
So he's like, they're not going to listen.
Although they're definitely anti the Empire. That's for sure.
Yes. So there we go. That is the point I wanted to make. So that's another mistranslation. That's why I got confused for a second. Because in the original version, he says Imperial troops are pursuing her even as we speak. This is the example that I brought up from the text from that link earlier.
Oh, sure.
It was like one of the pictures.
Yeah.
It says this town is no match for the Empire. But in the retranslation, this city has the strength to stand up to the Empire but won't use it. So, I mean, that's a good, wow. That's really, really, really badly off.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a really bad mistake to make, right? Anyway, so Locke runs off after her, finds her in the cave. She's about to be attacked by some soldiers. He teams up with some Moogles.
we have Deus Ex Moogle happening here. This was just shocking and fun and interesting and surprising and all the things all at once. I love Moogles. Moogles were kind of a different thing prior to this game, right? And they had a different design too. I think for Final Fantasy VI in particular, their design was made to be a little more cutesy, a little more kind of what it became later.
So Moogle's first appearance was on the NES games. I think it was Final Fantasy III. Koichi Ishii had actually drawn Moogle since he was in high school or sometime in grade school. So they were their little white bear sort of design was the original design.
Okay.
But I think they are a little different in 6. And
they cutesied him up and made him fatter, and I don't know.
Well, what's actually interesting is have you seen the commercial for Final Fantasy VI, the TV commercial, where Mog is like, he's like an executive boss character, and people can come in and he's like, next! And he comes in and he lights them on fire or does magic to them. Hold on, you got to freaking see that. It's so funny.
Pretty funny.
We'll have to play this.
Ooh, scary. Final Fantasy III.
You have what it takes.
And what's funny
Love it.
is that Mog was on the cover of the game. So, the Final Fantasy VI cover...
funny, yeah.
Well, actually, let me make sure that's right. I think that's right. Yeah, Mog is on the cover. So you have the Final Fantasy III title with the sword, the old logo. And then it's just Mog there, and it's just some purple monster-looking thing. And so that's, they did the commercial. The commercial's so funny because I would have no idea from watching that, what this game is about at all. And I would be really surprised upon buying it that, the Moogle's not the main guy or something.
Why would they put the Moogle on the front cover like that and have him feature in the marketing? That's an interesting decision.
I think it's a Japanese mascot thing. It's just they like their mascots for things, but I don't know how that translated to the American box art. Because usually they changed them a lot.
Yeah, the Squaresoft, their North American representatives should have been like, hey guys, people want swords and dragons and stuff. Not this teddy bear.
You know what? I just had a thought, and this is a complete tangent at this point. Yeah. We're tangenting like crazy. But I read a quote that I didn't end up reading for last week's development history episode. I was going to bring it up at some later point, but Kitase was taught, and I think Sakaguchi too. They said over the years they've been surprised when they go to conventions or whatever, they meet fans, and people have all this passion and enthusiasm for Final Fantasy VI, and it's their favorite game.
Right,
and they're like, that surprised me to hear that, because this game didn't sell that well. They did not consider Final Fantasy VI to be a strong seller at the time. And I also meant to bring up in last episode that they had this extreme boiling rivalry with Enix and their Dragon Quest series. It was like their mission and goal in life at this point, to try to outsell a Dragon Quest game. So Dragon Quest would release their next title, Final Fantasy would come shortly after it, and Final Fantasy was doing well for Square. It was their flagship series, but it would never ever really approach the fame and popularity of Dragon Quest in Japan. And so they viewed Final Fantasy VI as a bit of a disappointment sales-wise. And now that I think about it, it's like, why was that the cover art in America?
Someone should have told them. Somebody should have been like, hey, maybe put your character in your main character.
Well, because they end up saying something like, these fans would tell me like how much they loved the game and how much it meant to them. And their thought was like, well, then why didn't you buy it? And it's like, well, dude, because that cover art right there tells me nothing about what most people appreciate about Final Fantasy VI.
There you go.
And I think the cover art for the Super Famicom version was just basically the logo, which is still a way stronger image. The Final Fantasy logo with the Terra riding the Magitech armor behind it.
Oh, sure,
the Amano art.
Yeah. But just without the Moogle.
Without the Moogle, without this different logo that they had for the American versions.
Yeah.
The purple.
Which looks more Dragon Quest-y, actually.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. This is, in most cases, I think Japanese box art is better than American box art for games.
I often think that.
This is probably the first case I can think of where I think it's the opposite. I think this is, sorry. No. What did I just say? This is another case where the American box art was just like really, really, I don't know. Like, I don't know who that's, when you go into a store and you saw Xenogears on the shelf, and you saw, I mean, this is actually lending to my point. Final Fantasy VII, too. You see Cloud and the Buster Sword, like, you see that image and you go, I want to play that.
That sold that game so bad. That sword design sold that whole game.
Yeah, the sword and the spiky blonde hair sold Final Fantasy VII as much as any commercial or any promotion aside from that. Because back then, parents and kids would walk into a store, which game do you want?
Yep.
That one looks sweet. I wonder what kid walked into a store, or how many, I guess, in general, walked into a store and looked at that box art and went, versus something else that had, a cool tank on it or something like that. Yeah. And they would pick that instead.
And so, if they did happen to pick it, they would have been very happy with themselves.
Very surprised.
Like, it's, it just doesn't really tell you much about it.
Yeah. So anyway, tangent over on that, I guess.
All right.
Where were we?
Back to Deus Ex
Moogles. We're talking about Moogles. So yeah, Moogles were designed from the beginning to be kind of cutesy little white bears.
Okay. So I could be misinformed on that. It could just be that what I had read was referencing the fact that the pixel art was so much better here that you were able to get a better image of the Moogles than you had ever gotten in previous games.
Yeah.
But either way, this is pretty cool. This is actually is a thing that ends up happening a little bit, in Final Fantasy VII, you end up having to do something very similar. But you position your Moogles as if they're an army, and you put them along the branching paths as these soldiers are coming up, and you fight a bunch of battles, and a bunch of Moogles show up, like tons of them. And so they save you from all of the soldiers that are trying to capture Terra and Locke. And it's really cool. I don't know. I can't remember if this happens again in the game or if this is kind of the only time. But it's cool.
There's other examples where you at least split the party.
Where you split the party. That's true. But it's cool to be able to control, multiple different people. It's a different kind of way to make the RPG battle system more interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Cool.
Speaking about ideas that popped up in an earlier game that seemed to have inspired something later, this actually feels a little bit similar, though much more simple, to the battle scenes you do in FF7 when you're protecting the big phoenix bird on the mountain, and
yes,
the Shinra troops are coming
that's
up.
what I was referencing. Yeah, it's got that feel.
It's got that feel to it.
This this would have been the first FF game where that happened.
Yeah.
Right, and then you see that carried on in later games.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're right about that. We got chat here posting some images, different images, like cover images of Final Fantasy VI.
Oh,
so like for the anthology,
PS1 definitely had a cool,
awesome.
Cool
this one for the Game Boy Advance is way better.
Sweet.
Here's the Xenogears with the freaking
cross.
Awesome mech and the wings. Like just these.
Okay, by the way,
there's the Final Fantasy VI Japan. Yeah. Like that's dope, dude.
Okay. Go down to Xenogears really quick. Okay, that is, imagine that's a crucifix cross, but you're underneath it, looking up, and it's at an angle, and it's angled in 3D space, going that way.
I think you're right about that. The X.
I never realized that until just now.
Yep. Okay, so let's see here. Anyways, you rescue her. Mog is one of the Moogles that fights with you. He's the only Moogle you can actually change the equipment.
Oh, there you go.
And like examine in that way.
Nice.
So anyways, Mog will come back later, but you can steal his equipment. So you can like go in and unequip him and take his stuff and then give it to someone else, because I think he has a mithril spear and a mithril shield, which are better than like the bucklers and other equipment that characters have at this point. So.
I love the text. Thanks, Moogles. We're in your debt. Like the world's about to end. You're stuck at the bottom of a cave. The Imperial soldiers come to get you. And this just army of teddy bears comes and kills them all and leaves. And you're just like, this is normal. Thank you, Moogles. We'll see you next time. So funny.
Yep.
Do you feel like the idea of Moogles having prominence in FF is something like Ewoks from Return of the Jedi?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Thinking about it, I feel like
I can't say whether or not like anyone has ever spoke, like whether Koichi Ishii has said, I drew Moogles in high school because I watched Star Wars, like a direct link like that, but certainly like they feel similar, right? Like a similar idea.
I feel like when selling the idea of putting a character like a Moogle in a game like this to the executive board, you would have to bring up Ewoks in order to say, yes, people want this.
Yeah. Well, I guess in Japan, they're always looking for mascot characters anyways. So when you see a Chocobo or a Moogle design, it's like, there it is. That's what we're looking for.
I guess I'm thinking more from an American
standpoint. Yeah. Okay, so anyways, they get out of there. Locke kind of carries her body out.
Yes.
Flips a switch. They're about to leave.
Once again, his expression is priceless.
Yeah.
When he finds out she has amnesia, and he's just like, "Whoa, you have amnesia?"
Yep.
I love it.
Yeah. So she's saying, "Oh, you saved me." He says, "Save your thanks for the Moogles," and she's like, "Oh, I can't remember a thing. It's like my mind's trapped in a fog." He's like, "You lost your memory?"
Yeah, he just loses it.
Now, this makes maybe a little bit more sense as to why he would be surprised or upset to hear that, because, again, the returners want to recruit her. Exactly. And if she doesn't have her memory, does that mean she doesn't have her powers or whatever?
Oh, fair enough.
He's going to find out soon enough that that's not the case. Yeah. But anyway, so he's like, surprised about that. She says that a man said it would come back eventually. He says, so you've got amnesia. Don't worry. I won't leave your side until your memory returns. And she's confused by that. So, I'm not going to abandon someone just because they lost their memory. I'll keep you safe. So they decide they're going to head to Figaro, which is where the man told Locke to take her.
Yes. To go see the king
of Figaro, who is Edgar. Now, Edgar is
great, man.
Kind of playing double agent a little bit here. He's got like a formal alliance or a formal treaty with the Empire.
Yes.
But he is secretly a returner himself.
Yep.
So that's why they're going there to meet him. So you leave Narshe and you head through the desert.
There's a building right at the entrance of Narshe that's a classroom. It's called the Classroom.
Yep. The tutorials.
I loved this concept.
Yep.
I thought this was super cool. I don't know how often games do stuff like this, but a separate place that's out of the way where you can, but it's in the way enough to where you probably won't miss it if you're just looking around. And if you're new to this genre of games, or if you've never... I don't know, if you just want to kind of delve more into the way this particular battle system works, you can go there and spend as much time there as you want. Yep. And there's tons of people talking to you. Yep. And I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, that kind of became a tradition of the series as well. They were doing that back in Final Fantasy IV. They had a bunch of people who would teach you the mechanics of the game. Even in Final Fantasy VII, there's some rooms in Junon where people will... Well, there's the arms... like where they sell weapons,
and then you go up to
near
the
Seventh
top.
Heaven.
Yeah,
they do that a little bit there, but then later in June on they have like a second one where they go even more into depth on some things. So
that's right.
This was kind of a Final Fantasy tradition thing to do.
Love it. And then in the overworld, I look, as soon as you leave a town and you're at the overworld, this is how games should be. Like, this is the way. Overworld maps
feels awesome
with a small character,
and
then the music playing, and it's just like boom, you can go wherever you want to.
Yeah,
and the world just opens up, and often it takes you by surprise because you're playing the game in a certain way, and as soon as you leave the city, you don't really know exactly what's coming next, and it's just like just the freedom. It just screams like freedom to you as soon as you're on the overworld map. It's so cool.
Another tangent time here. So I was a fan of the series. I started following it really closely, kind of like around the time. This would have been like PS3 era, and so the PSP was out, right? And I don't think I was necessarily at the time maybe so concerned or whatever about like thinking about the mechanics of Final Fantasy in any really deep way. I was just excited for the next Final Fantasy game to come out. Like, I love Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is awesome. But I didn't really like think about this series or the genre of the game or like the structure of how they were made in this one versus this one in any deep way at the time. So I think I had played Final Fantasy 13 recently and had my feelings on that. And then I was playing Dissidia Duodecim, which is the second Final Fantasy Dissidia game.
Beat 'em up.
Fighting game, right? And
on the Vita?
It's on the PlayStation Portable, so PSP.
Oh, okay.
And they have an overworld map in that game that you run around on. And I remember that was the first time where I went, oh yeah, why don't they do this anymore? Wait a second.
At that point.
They have not been doing this for a long time.
Right.
What happened to this? I missed this so much.
10 or
I was like, dude, because Final Fantasy X didn't really have it. Final Fantasy X had like kind of linear maps. So it was since FF9, since the PlayStation 1, I hadn't played a game. I think there were some on the PlayStation 2 that did it, but I hadn't played them. I hadn't played an RPG since the PlayStation 1 at that point where they had an overworld map. And I hadn't really thought about it in any deep way.
Until you see it.
Until I saw it.
So cool.
And I was like, why didn't they do this in Final Fantasy 13? Why didn't they do this in Final Fantasy 12? Why didn't they do this?
Yeah.
This is way better.
Yes.
I love this.
Cool.
I love this. This is how all JRPGs should be. Anyway.
This is the way.
Because, again, it's the abstraction, right? And the abstraction gets across this point of this giant world that you're exploring. The whole world. You're going to go all over the world. It's like the scale of it is so huge. But we're not going to make you walk like, one-to-one scale like around the world, right? And the other thing that ended up being missed from some of those other RPGs was like vehicles. And that was such a huge part of the exploration part of Final Fantasy that I missed. Was getting a vehicle or riding on a chocobo or an airship.
Yes.
And going around and exploring it.
Yep.
And
freely.
Yeah.
That's part of the abstraction. One of the things that an abstraction allows you to do is it allows your mind to interpret it, right? So it's not just freedom of movement, but the taking an abstraction and making it even lower resolution.
Yes.
So just gives your mind more freedom to imagine what is happening here or to think about. It's not just the potential of what you can do and where you can go. It just feels so immersive. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. And for, again, any of you who have not seen, say, our Final Fantasy X podcast series, this goes all the way back to the original Final Fantasy as well. This will be in the retrospective coming out soon.
Good.
This was the idea of an airship, which is now a commonality. It's just it's synonymous almost with JRPGs, particularly of the 90s era.
Yeah.
That was a Final Fantasy invention. Airships as a thing was created by the Final Fantasy team.
That's right.
And the entire idea behind it was, how should we put teleport magic in this game to allow players to quickly go from one town to another? Is that something we should do? And Hironobu Sakaguchi said, no, I don't like that because we designed all of this stuff on this world map for them to find, and they're going to skip over it. They'll never find it if we don't make them physically traverse it. So let's give them a fast way to do that. And that's where the idea of airships and the different vehicles you get in Final Fantasy came from, was this will allow you to avoid battles, to go quickly, but you might see something over there and go, oh, what's that? I got to go check that out. Yeah. And that whole exploration aspect of Final Fantasy was hugely important to how it felt, to learn those worlds and explore those worlds. And so, yeah, I get that feeling.
Very cool.
Similarly, every time you come to the world map in Final Fantasy VI, it's just like, these world maps are so cool. And this was the first time it was rendered in mode 7 all the time.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So the whole, the world was kind of like angled, and you can look off onto the horizon. And
yeah. Good stuff.
So cool. Dude Mackay says, yeah, the abstraction also helps you, your mind to kind of just like grasp the distance here. And it could have taken multiple days. It took you 2 minutes to go to one place, but like it could have been multiple days.
Right.
So
they traveled really far, even though it only took a short time. Compression, right? We talked about compression earlier.
Yeah. Okay. And then Mix has a good point here too. It also sells more of the belief that the characters have had off-screen time to bond.
To bond, sure.
Right. Also, when you use a tent, or when you, I'll talk a little bit about the hotel later. But you're thinking about what's happening here, and the game, Sakaguchi knows that people are thinking about this. As it's happening, right? People are kind of imagining what's happening. So it doesn't all have to be delivered to you directly via dialogue. Yeah.
So you reach Figaro. Here. You go meet the king, Edgar.
And the castle is pretty sweet.
It is.
It's got like really these turbines that are turning everywhere. And
castle right in the middle. The wise man did not build his house upon the rock in this case. He built it upon the sand.
He built it on the sand. But there's a twist.
But he really was the wise man, though. That's what I'm saying.
He was.
The wise man did it this time, not the foolish man.
The wise man built his house up, capable of submerging under the sand. That's the really wise man.
That's
right?
the wisest man.
You know that you've seen those bell curve things, right? Where it'll show like IQ 60. Wise man built his house upon a rock, and then IQ 100 is like, no, wise man the foolish man
built his house on sand.
So IQ 60 builds house on sand, IQ 100 builds house on rock, but then IQ 160 builds on sand.
The wisest man builds his hand on sand.
Oh, I might have to make that meme just so that I can show it for
perfect,
this podcast.
Dude. We'll make a shirt and we'll sell it to our fans. Okay, so they meet the king, and he says something similar. You mean this woman this is what leads me to think that they all have heard rumors of her.
Yeah,
and
word
that they
has
were
reached,
eager to try to recruit her.
Yeah.
So you mean this is the woman we're looking for, we've been talking about? Terra says, who are you? He says, oh, my apologies. How rude of me to turn my back on a lady on our very first meeting. And then we do the on-screen thing that goes black and it just shows him. The young king of Figaro Castle, imperial ally and champion of the technological revolution. So that's why his castle is capable of doing what it's doing, is because he's into the tech, right? I guess the kingdom of Figaro is technologically, they're technologically advanced. They're on the edge, the cutting edge of that stuff.
He is an innovator.
I
love this. You talked to one of the guards right outside of Edgar's area. Well, maybe not right out, but it's a little ways out. He says, it doesn't look like it, but this castle incorporates some of the most high-tech devices in existence. For example, they're all top secret. I got a good laugh out of that one.
How they used NPCs at the time, too, right? To give you hints about things in the world like that. And they did them in such a short space, again, just like one or two dialogue boxes, and then it was over.
Yep. You have to find all the NPCs, though.
Yeah, it's great. And then this also leads to the fact that, like, his sort of, like, gameplay ability are all tools. So he uses tools as his weapons. So, like, technology.
Cool. Yeah, that's right.
So, like, the bio blaster, the noise blaster, the auto crossbow.
The noise blaster.
Yeah. It's all sort of like, these almost... wacky inventor level sort of inventions for different weapons that he's been, you could imagine that he, sort of like works on in his free time. Like, what kind of crazy thing can I come up with next, right? Anyway, so that's who he is and what he's all about.
He's also something of a womanizer.
Yes. And he tries to hit on her right away.
His character's great. I really like Edgar.
Yeah, I do too.
You don't know quite what to make of him initially, but he's fun.
Yeah. So he tries to hit on her because she's like, "Oh, why are you being so nice to me? Is it because of my abilities?" You know, she's still trying to like.
Now, what does the advance say? Because I loved the dialogue in the SNES.
Yeah, they're similar, but he says, "I'll give you 3 reasons. First of all, your beauty has captivated me. Second, I'm dying to know if I'm your type." And he says, "I guess your abilities would be a distant third."
Okay, and that's more or less that.
Yeah, and she's like confused. And then obviously, again, he probably is like defeated when he realized that didn't work. And so she's like, "What's the matter?" And he says, "Guess my technique's getting a bit rusty."
Yeah, I guess I'm getting a bit rusty. And this is where she says, any other girl would have been in a swoon, but I guess I'm not normal, right?
Yeah, right.
Now, you can read that in the Bella from Twilight, like, I'm not normal. I'm a teenager and I'm unique and I'm I'm not like all those other girls. But I actually think what the game is going after more is that she really isn't normal. Like there's something very different about her. And when she says other girls would have done this, it's not that she's so proud of how unique she is and it didn't work on me. It's almost like she's kind of like longing, like, whoa, this is what normal people do.
I wish I could be more
I'm not normal, and I want to be normal. I can't, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a sadness that goes along with it.
Right. So you're allowed to kind of explore the castle a little bit. You can't really proceed with the story until you talk to the High Priestess, and she's the one that tells you about Edgar's twin brother, Sabin. And there's a little bit of a scene that takes place here.
Yeah,
and this is the scenario that we were talking about in the first episode that was written by Kaori Tanaka, also known as Soraya Saga, the writer for Xenogears. Yeah. So she wrote this scenario between Edgar and Sabin. And I love the music that accompanies this. I think it's called Coin Song. And the reason it's called that is it's a scene that we'll see later, so I won't spoil yet why it's called Coin Song. But it's one of my favorite pieces of music in the game. It's like, it kind of embodies everything about the Final Fantasy VI soundtrack that I like so much. It's like you can't help but just like feel so good when you listen to it, but it's like pretty sad music. It's melancholic. It's like got this air to it that's like a little bit sad and depressing. But there's a piece of it too that's just so full of like sort of like the hope, the ray of hope, which is something Bannon brings up later, right?
Yes, the Pandora's box.
I'm thinking we probably won't get to anymore today. But
we probably should wrap up soon, actually.
I think we'll probably wrap up after this scene.
Okay.
But anyways, there's like that duality to all the music, where on the surface it sounds really sad or melancholic or depressing, but there's kind of that ray inside of it that is a little bit hopeful.
That's cool. I like that.
Beautiful.
I like that out of that.
And
that's cool.
And I feel the same way. I kind of talked about this with Final Fantasy VIII's Fisherman's Horizon.
Yeah,
similar kind of feeling to that, right? So I really, really love it. So that music is kind of playing here as, well, you name him in the scene, but it's Sabin comes in like, Edgar, like, what's wrong with Dad? Like, why is everyone talking about his successor? And Edgar's like, are you blind? Haven't you seen how thin his face has become?
Yeah.
Sabin seems to be maybe trying to ignore or just like not think about the fact that their dad is dying, right?
He's also younger, and I don't know how much younger.
Well, he's supposed to be his twin brother is what she says, right. So they're the same age.
Don't they say younger? Maybe not. Okay, I see. Because in at least in the SNES, he's just called Youth. They don't say his name initially.
Yeah, they say Youth, and then you name him in the scene.
That's it. Okay, so I assumed it meant younger, but you're right.
The idea is that they were supposed... I think the reason it's confusing is because they're using the same sprites for like the current Edgar and Sabin.
For their kids.
But they're supposed to be kids at the time, I think. Like teenagers. So they're supposed to be younger in the scene, but it doesn't look that way based on the sprites they used. So he's Sabin's like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, Edgar, and then Edgar kind of runs off.
See, once again, they're not spoon feeding it to us. They're hinting at what's happening. They aren't just saying it outright. I always appreciate that.
And it's like, oh, are you crying? You know, he saw that he was tearing up, and Edgar had to kind of leave the scene. So then on screen again, we get the black with the spotlight on the character. Edgar's twin brother, who traded the throne for his own freedom. Now, I thought it was interesting that it said he traded the throne. That makes me wonder if he might be the older of the two twins. So Sabin was actually the one who was supposed to be king, but he decided not to do it. Well, actually, now that I say that, there is a scene that comes up later that totally explains this.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
This is fun. The girls at the castle all seem pretty sick of Edgar always hitting on them.
Yep.
So he's like, I'm a king, and he's got his little like, no, like his little little animation. He's just a flirty kind of guy. Yep. You go and talk to the girls, and they're just like, has he hit on you yet? And they're talking to Tara, and it's really funny. But you also you go to a nursery, I guess, where there is a woman named Matron. Well, probably not named Matron, but there is a matron there. And there's a bunch of kids around, and she gives us some story of Edgar and Sabin as well.
Yep.
But there's a young girl there, this like really little girl running around. And if you talk to her, she reveals that Edgar is hitting on her too.
Yeah.
She's like 6 or something.
No.
And she says that Edgar says that he'll marry me when I grow up.
So
basically.
The way that I looked at this is, like little girls will often kind of, play at like, thinking about growing up and getting married and this sort of thing. And I even remember I had a friend next door when I was really little. I was probably 5 years old. And this girl asked me, will you marry me when I get older? I'm sure a lot of people have had similar experience, right?
Yeah.
And so the way I kind of read this is like Edgar's really good with kids. And so when this girl asked him to marry her, he's like,
sure,
when you get older,
yeah.
like, yes, like to, just, playing with her kind of a thing.
I'm not reading in that he's a pedophile.
He's actually,
Because he says when you're older. So it's like, okay, he's not like that. But in light of the context of every woman that you meet in the castle is just like, hey, has Edgar hit on you yet? And then you finally meet like a little kid, and it turns out he's promising to marry her too. And it's like, it's just really funny. I actually thought it was really clever. Yeah. And I thought it was a really funny, fun
it's
way
It's sweet.
Play on his character.
Okay, so I think we're going to stop right there as Kefka comes into play. And we'll kind of continue on from there next time. I did not expect we would go on quite this long, but there was kind of a lot to get through there. So it's just going to change a little bit where I think we should play up to for next time. We're not going to be able to probably get quite as far. So let me take a look at this real quick and decide. Okay, so here's what I've decided based on how much we have to cover next week. Let's say that we'll play up to the end of the Phantom Train sequence for next time. So that's where you should play up to and prepare for next week. So anyway, thank you for joining us, everybody. Hopefully this is enjoyable so far. I always end up thinking we'll do this many, and then it turns out to be more. We'll see if that ends up being the case for this as well. But Phantom Train for next time. Till then, peace out.